Hey everyone, welcome back to the Prosperous Nonprofit. I'm excited to have with me on the show today Amy Varga of the Varga Group. Amy, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to catch up with you and to chat and to just kind of kick us off. I would love to hear a little bit about what you do. What is your company? What do you all do?
You bet. I own a small consulting firm called the Varga Group, and we do three primary services. We are campaign consultants for large capital campaigns and large major gift campaigns for nonprofits, private schools, and other kinds of 501(c)(3)s. And we also do board retreats and facilitation of those kinds of staff retreats or board retreats, any type of group retreat. And lastly, I do individual coaching with executive directors and chief development officers and a very small handful of fellow business owner consultants.
Awesome. Thank you. I have questions about all of these, but before we go there, I would love to hear what has your journey looked like? How did you get to the point where you are doing this consulting work, you're running your own business? What has the path looked like to get you to this point?
I love that question. Thanks for asking. So this is shocking for me to be able to say my 27th year doing something in nonprofits. I'm a lifer. And so I went to college and undergrad and got a degree in sociology, which I like to say prepares me for everything and nothing. And when I graduated, my 22-year-old brain knew that I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to make a difference. And at that time, my menu of options, again, 22-year-old thinks in, a 22-year-old way. I thought you could be a teacher, you could be some type of medical provider, or you could work at a nonprofit. Those were the ways I thought at that time you could make a difference. And so I chose to go down the nonprofit route. And so I started by working in some small grassroots organizations, and really stumbled upon becoming a fundraiser. And so I did that, fell into it, and discovered I loved it. And so eventually I went back to graduate school and got a master's in higher ed administration and pivoted to doing that kind of work in higher education. And so spent probably 15 years working inside of different higher education institutions, doing major gift fundraising and large scale alumni relations projects. And let's see, I was probably, whatever that would have been, 18 years in. And because probably I was sitting in higher ed where there's a lot of teaching and that kind of things happening, I decided to call up a local community college and ask them, hey, could I start a certificate program in fundraising here? And so I did do that, and they were receptive, and that sort of led to me teaching both at that community college, but then teaching graduate students in the MBA programs at two local universities here in Portland. And so I did that for about 10 years. And so I was working full-time at a university and also teaching in the evenings at a couple universities in their MBA programs. And those students in my classes started asking me, hey, could you, help me on the side with this? Or could you come in and talk to our board about this kind of thing? And so I started doing that just, pro bono and just kind of experimenting with it. And eventually I decided to make the leap and left my day job, so to speak. And then that's sort of how I got started. So that's about 11 and a half years ago now, full time. So I started doing that kind of organically, probably for 6 or 7 years. And then, it took me a little while to get the courage to try it full time. And I did that about 11 years ago.
That's amazing. I love that you were like, I think you need a certificate program in fundraising. Can I do it? And they were like, yeah. And you went for it. That's fantastic. How did you sort of assess that that was a need and that you were the person to fill that need?
I looked around at the MBA programs and the MPA programs and the community colleges kind of continuing education. And they, several of them had nonprofit management as part of what they offered in those different areas. But when I looked at the syllabus and the curriculum, none of them had fundraising, which was
Hmm.
totally wild,
Yeah.
because it's such a vital piece of the puzzle for, managing and being a leader in nonprofits. And so that seemed really strange, and sort of like a blind spot. And so, I guess for me, I noticed that was sort of like the market gap that I noticed. But then
Mhm.
I guess I can't really explain. I've always been, the kind of person, even as a kid, who just said, I'll try that, and goes for it. And so I guess this was just the next type of thing I did that with. It certainly wasn't the first thing I've done like that in other parts of my life. So
That's so cool. That is like super surprising that fundraising was not included in the curriculum. That seems like a pretty big missing piece.
agreed. So
Um,
it was like, this seems like a no-brainer. And I think once someone approached them who, there's some credibility, right? So I had a bunch of years of, like over a decade, of professional experience and street cred. I didn't just call up at 22 and say, hey, I'd like to do this, right? So
yeah.
I built up my expertise, and I think frankly, because I had a master's in higher ed administration, that also helped because I was familiar with, I basically had gotten an MBA in running, higher education institutions is functionally what that degree was in. And so
Mhm.
that was useful. And I was working in higher ed. So I knew that landscape pretty well. So that all helped me, I think, feel more comfortable, approaching them and going for it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's so cool. I've often thought, I think I've even said this to somebody else on the podcast before. Like I have an MPA, the Master's in Public Administration, and being as far into my career as I am right now, I'm like, I'm not sure that I have used anything from that degree at all. Like it feels so, and I was cleaning out my basement and I found some like textbooks and notebooks and things from my graduate, a time there. And I was like, this feels so theoretical and so not grounded in the reality of what running a nonprofit organization looks like. I'm like, we need to do better for our graduate students because it's so like, it is not aligned with what running a nonprofit looks like whatsoever. So I'm like, we need to create something better.
Well, I agree. I think there's something magical about practitioners being educators for those programs. I mean, there's, that's more adjunct faculty who are practitioners bring a different perspective, and the blending of the academic folks with the practitioner folks, I think is a really strong program because it makes sure that it's grounded in reality. And I remember during that time, I would bring in stories, from the day that I had, right? Or what have
Mhm.
you, to class. And that's something that's, I think, really useful. And, one thing sometimes people ask me about growing my business and how that worked. And teaching for 10 years was key to that because all those folks
Mhm.
were there because they wanted and they were on a path to becoming a leader at an organization, in my area. And so I think we all have a fondness for those that taught us and put them in a position of authority in some ways or expertise in a sense. And so people, still who were in those classes, it's so exciting to see them go, and now they're leading. So many of them are leading some of our iconic organizations in our area. And I love seeing them, rise in their organizations.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I would imagine that's super fulfilling. And I know you're very involved in in the organizations in the community where you live. So that's so cool to be able to see that trajectory of people that you've encountered in different parts of their journey. Going back to you were working at a nonprofit. How did you land on the fundraising piece? Was a fundraising job your very first nonprofit job, and you were just like, "Let me try this," and it stuck? Or did you try out different things? Did you fall into fundraising? I know that happens often as well.
Yeah, I know. Well, today now it seems like I love that, the fundraising profession is a lot more professionalized today, in 2024. But when I started, it was 1997. And I think most people did sort of fall into it. And no one really even thought
Mhm.
about that as a career path. And so I did sort of fall into it because um, this is so dating me, but I looked up, like in the newspaper, right? And like on the job boards and things like that for jobs at that time. And so for a lot of nonprofits, there's stating the obvious here, the administrative side, which is fairly small, and then the program side, which is really big. And that's the core of obviously the mission of organizations. And so um, I didn't have, a social work background, or I didn't have a lot of the professional skills to do the program work, of a lot of the, social service or other kinds of organizations. I don't have uh, I was an athlete, I wasn't an artist or a musician or something like that, right? That would have led to maybe even arts organization on the program side of things. And so when I started looking at jobs in this just general nonprofit education space, I was like, well, I'm not really qualified to do the program work. I don't have the right degree or whatever to do the program work. So what does that leave me? And I had always been a person that liked to organize things and was very involved on my college campus or with organizing different activities and things like that. And so when I saw these job descriptions that talked about creating a backpack program and filling it and running events and being in kind of the community relations pieces. I thought, well, I feel like I kind of know how to do that, and I'll try it. And so my very first job, um, this is kind of a fun and probably very relatable story to a lot of people. My very first job I got as a development coordinator. There's an office of two, me and a development director at a domestic violence agency in the Bay Area of California. And I started, and 2 weeks later, the development director quit. And so they decided, well, Amy seems like she's smart and bright and eager, and we'll just not, fill that job, and we'll just have her report right to the executive director and see how that goes. And as kind of scary that was at the time, is probably one of the best things that ever happened, because I just had to jump in with both feet, kind of let go of not knowing what I was doing, because I really didn't know what I was doing, and figure it out, on the job. And I got to report directly to that executive director. And, she's still in my, kind of life network today. She's a fundraising consultant now herself. And it's fun to, feel like she really mentored me and helped me. Um, and that was also when I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing besides just trying to figure it out. I also learned, and someone probably told me, I don't remember, there was something called, AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and there was a chapter in my area. And so I just started going to those and asking all the questions, and kind of reading whatever I could get my hands on. And so that's really how I got my start, and just kind of thrown into the deep end. And the cool part was I really loved it. I liked it. I could have
Mhm.
been thrown in the deep end and not, but I did. And so that was how I got my start. And then I just, kind of took it from there.
Yeah, I was gonna, I feel like that's a story that, like you said, I think a lot of people can relate to. We often get thrown into roles, and in some ways it can be really challenging, especially if you don't really like what you're doing and you're sort of thrust into a leadership role and you don't have the skills and the ability. Like, that's one thing. And also, I feel like nonprofits often afford us amazing opportunities that we would not have at, larger corporations, or or organizations that are not operating at with such sort of like a grassroots structure. And so you really can expand your skills and advance and grow really quickly because those opportunities are there. We're trying to make the most of limited resources, and so we're, you're easily able to jump up. And I feel like, to some degree, that's how I was able to sort of be thrust into a CFO position. And I not sure if I necessarily felt ready at the time, but it was like the stretch that I needed to, to really push myself and continue to grow. So I love that you had that opportunity. And so today, when I asked about what you do today and what your company does, the first thing you mentioned was campaign consulting. So can you explain for our listeners if they're like, what does that actually mean? What is that? And when would an organization know that they need to hire somebody like you to help them with some sort of fundraising campaign?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and just to be clear, I am not a one woman show. That would be way too much to handle just by me, and my team is incredible and I'm grateful for them, and could never do what I'm doing by myself. So we handle about between 10 and 20 campaigns at a time, just in terms of scale. So,
Wow.
so we're kind of a mid-sized consulting firm. We're not one of the big nationals, and we're not handling one at a time. So capital campaigns are, this is something I'm super passionate about. So I'm super excited to talk about it. I think that when an organization is in a growth zone, when they want to grow their impact, grow their programs, they're going to need to also grow their operations and their staffing, and also potentially their facilities to grow all of those things. And so that's what a capital campaign really is about. Sometimes I think people misunderstand it to be a building campaign. And I think that's a misunderstanding of the real purpose behind what a capital campaign really is. It's a growth initiative for an organization. And so sometimes that includes a growth of your facilities or the physical assets that you need to deliver your programs. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes, programming, depending on what your programming is, just needs more people involved. But usually when you have more people, you also need more space. And if you're serving more people, you need more space. And so those things usually intersect with each other. And so when an organization is on the growth path, that's when they likely need some help. And that comes in a lot of different, ways. I would say they would need your help, right? And your team's help. They need help figuring out how to grow their financial management and the dollars that make that possible. And you guys are a key partner in helping organizations on a growth trajectory. We're a different kind of partner, and we sort of all come around together. So you need a financial partner, in my view, when you're on a growth journey. You need a campaign consultant that helps you understand how are you going to fund it? What are the different components of that funding? And how does philanthropy play into that? If indeed you need a new facility or an expanded facility or expanded physical assets, then you're also going to need some other kinds of partners. You're probably going to need, a financial institution that's going to be able to help bridge and loans that bridge financing for you to do that. They also might want to just finance, organizations sometimes want to finance that. So long-term financing is something that financial institutions can help you with. You'll also need an architect, to help you plan the space and how much space and what that space looks like. And then, of course, you're going to need a contractor who, helps build it for you. And sometimes organizations that are, I think, smart, my bias is that they also hire something called an owner's representative, which is someone that organizes all the players to instead of them trying to organize all those external partners. And so that owner's representative oversees kind of the project as a whole. So there's actually a bunch of us kind of external partners that come around organizations when they're on a growth initiative and working on a capital campaign or a campaign of some sort that help organizations think about it and be strategic and do the planning work. Our piece is around the philanthropic dollar strategy. So I tell organizations all the time, if you don't have to fundraise, you might want to consider that. So if you have a bunch of reserves or equity of some sort that you can draw on to self-fund it, that's ideal, right? If you can build up that kind of reserve base, that's ideal because you don't have to pay, for counsel to help you. fundraising isn't free, the act of doing fundraising is expensive. And you wouldn't have to have any kind of lending relationship that come with, the interest that comes with that. Most of the time, organizations aren't in a position to fully fund their projects, and so they need to have a combination of sources. They may have some resources of their own. They may do some long-term financing. They may have public funds that they access for certain aspects of the project. And then usually there's a component that's philanthropic, so from individuals and foundations mostly. And so that puzzle piece is what we're experts in, is helping organizations build a strategy and identify who those folks are that can be their best prospects for that puzzle piece of the bigger project.
Interesting. And are you, as part of your work, are you kind of going through an organization's existing donor base, or are you also prospecting outside of their sort of existing network?
So capital campaigns are always, the fundraising aspect of capital campaigns are always built, I shouldn't say always, asterisk. Maybe there's like, a kind of oddball exception, but let's assume we'll put that aside. They're 99.9% of the time built on strong annual fund programs that already exist, and they're inside out and top down. And so that means that you are not going to find Oprah Winfrey and get a hold of her and have her give to you. What you're trying to do is, and this is a piece of the service that we provide, is analyze your database of existing supporters and find that there's this Oprah Winfrey person that's been giving you $20 a year, for the last 10 years. But wow, she seems to have a lot more capacity. And so how do we reach out to her? And how do we build a relationship with her? That's a puzzle piece that we do help with. And actually, really what you're looking for is, organizations that this whole thing we're talking about right now, the jargony type of term for this is called a feasibility study. And so a feasibility study, a lot of people have heard that term and maybe don't know exactly what it means, but essentially what it means is assessing two things: the internal readiness and capacity of an organization to fundraise at a larger scale, and an assessment and analysis of, do you have the donors and the relationships with the donors to fund what you want to fund, or not? And so we look at both things. So, we look at, do you have enough staff? Do you have the technology and the systems in place, or how could you get them in place to have the capacity to facilitate fundraising at a much higher level? We also look at that question you asked: who are you already in relationship with that you could talk to about this project that would help make it possible? And so if one thing I feel very passionate about is that sometimes consultants, we're not as direct as I think we should be. If anyone's listening and thinking about doing a campaign, before you pay 1 cent to me or anyone else to do any of what I just said, just take a piece of paper out, write down 1 through 30 on that piece of paper, and then write down the names of people that are already giving to you, that you already know how to reach and are in conversation with. Put them down, and that can make big gifts, and you think likely would, be inclined, if so, motivated and convinced that this project was important. If you can't make that list, you don't need to pay me or anyone else to tell you what we would tell you at the end of a, $30,000 or $40,000 feasibility study, that, hey, you don't have the right people, or you don't have enough relationship with them. Anybody that comes to you and says, we'll help you go get in touch with Oprah Winfrey, or whoever the Oprah Winfreys are in your community, that's just not how it works.
That's that's super interesting. So the feasibility study is sort of like a little bit of a test that you have to pass before you move on to actually going through with it. Because I would imagine if the results of the feasibility study are showing that like, okay, y'all do not have the connections, you do not have the existing donors to make this successful. Do organizations, does that happen? And do organizations kind of like stop there? And then is there like if you sort of don't pass this test, is there work that they can do to get to the point where maybe a little bit down the road they would be ready for a larger campaign?
Great question. We like to say that it's a how, not an if, when we're working with organizations on campaigns. So what that means is that um, how you currently thinking of, are you currently thinking about it might not work, or at least not work right now. And so this is where, so then we can come up with different strategies. Maybe you need to take a year or two to develop the relationships with folks. Maybe you have, maybe the analytics showed you have a lot of capacity in your database. We're actually working with an organization right now that this is the case. There's a lot of capacity here, but you are not that close to these people yet. And
Mm.
so none of us know, I don't have a crystal ball, neither do they. Will some of these high potential people be interested in deepening the relationship? All you can do is try to cultivate and qualify those people. And so they're spending the next year under our guidance with, very specific engagement strategies and qualification strategies to see if people, will be interested in leaning in and hearing more. And then we'll assess again at the end of that, what happened? Yes, wow, all these people that have, been longtime loyal folks, but haven't yet made major gifts or major gifts at the size that would be required for your success of your project. Maybe they will be more motivated and engaged and be willing to do so, after a process of, engaging with them. Sometimes it's a phased approach. So sometimes you can say, look, you can't do the whole project. We don't think you can do the whole project in one shot. We think that you could do this part of the project and chunk it off into different phases. And so that's another way that you can still fulfill the goals of, what you're hoping to do, but in a different way, on a different timeline. I would say, well, how would I say this? People reach out to me all the time, and I have to say, gosh, I think that you are really quite a ways away from being ready as an organization to take on something like this. And I provide them with a ton of resources and information, and do a lot of just kind of gratis explaining to them and their board why that's the case. And so that's one piece. When we take on a client, we've already done that kind of assessment that we think they can be successful in some way. What that exactly looks like in the end, kind of not clear, right? We have to go through the journey with them to figure that out. So we're not working with organizations. We don't let them hire us, I guess. We don't let them waste their money. I would say, unfortunately, some consultants do. But we don't. That's important as a kind of a ethical and integrity thing for me, is to tell people up front so that they can spend their money building their capacity and doing all the things versus paying me to tell them what I could easily tell them off the top.
Hmm. I was just thinking as you were saying that, I'm like, yeah, a good consultant will tell you no, like, please don't hire us. This is not the right fit for many reasons. And yeah, that's just for anybody listening. It's actually a good thing if a consultant tells you, no, you know what, this is not right. Yeah, that's so interesting. So for our listeners, if they're like, well, I want to raise a bunch of money. Like I have this big project in mind. Is there a sort of level of growth at which it's beyond just year over year growth and it becomes a campaign? So, if an organization is growing like 20 or 30% year over year, that's not really a campaign. That's just sort of year over year growth. But is there like a threshold at which, like, oh, if we want to do this thing and it's going to, we would need to double our revenue. Is there like a threshold at which organizations are like, okay, this is not really just incremental growth anymore. This is a campaign.
Yeah, there's two pieces that I want to respond to from your question. I'll respond to that one that you just asked, but I don't want to lose something over here. So I would say, and this is defined, I would not by a number, an exact number, but something that's transformative to the organization, something that is going to truly transform the organization and its impact is when a campaign is called for. The way that I like to think about fundraising is that your annual fundraising, your annual operating fundraising, are little C campaigns. Great fundraising is always done in the context of a campaign. Usually they're little C campaigns. You're having an end of the year campaign, or you have a little campaign for, a new roof on something or whatever it is, right? Like these are little C campaigns. But when it's a big C campaign, that's when we get involved. And that's what we help organizations with. And little C campaigns, you don't usually need all the other, financial manager, consultants, the, banks and contractors and, all the architects and all that kind of stuff. Those things are little C campaigns. You don't really need those other aspects for those. The big C campaigns are the ones where you're doing something truly transformative. Maybe you're buying a building for the first time. You're going to own your own building. Going from leasing to ownership is a huge transformational moment for organizations. Significantly expanding your operations in some way, or your staff in some way. Taking on maybe even a new element to what you do, expanding your mission in some transformative way. Those are all the kinds of things that would warrant a bigger kind of big C campaign in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Piece I also don't want to lose those. When you said, the way you phrased the question is really important that we acknowledge something. You said something like, if organizations are thinking, we want to do this, that is something that I always want to call out. If an organization wants to do it, that's not the right reason. And it won't go well. The community has to want you to do it. And the community has to need you to do it. If you want to do it, you can hustle $50,000 or $100,000, right? You should still be doing it out of a community-based reason, but let's say you weren't, you can hustle something. But if you're trying to raise, millions of dollars, it can't be because it's something you want to do. It needs to be something the community wants you to do and the community needs you to do. And that's the complete basis for your case for support. The case for support is never, ever a good one. We want to do this. It's the community needs us to do this. And therefore, donors and foundations, we need your help because the community needs this. The community is telling us that they need it. And we need you to help make that possible. That's what a strong case is about.
Huge distinction there. And yeah, like definitely, I think that's huge. And I mean, just think about the shift in messaging, the way that you said that, in the way that you would then speak to your potential supporters of your campaign, the community, not just like, hey, we want to do this cool thing as an organization, as some sort of, I don't know, ego trip situation. No, like the community needs this, and we need your help in supporting this. So I love that. That's a huge distinction. And I would imagine that's something that you can sort of suss out as you're talking to potential clients or organizations as well. Like, I'm sure you can kind of get a sense of like, okay, is this happening for the right reasons? Is there community need? Is there a community desire for this versus like, we want to do this cool thing. I
Yeah,
imagine
well,
you can
and
probably find that
yeah,
out quick.
usually capital campaigns or big campaign initiatives, the best way that they emerge is through strategic planning. And so what happens is that, a well-run strategic planning process is not an inward looking thing. It's an external engagements, planning process. And so I think that's something that's, I think, always been true, but I think that more and more organizations and themselves, and also encouraged by foundations, are orienting their strategic planning to understanding the needs of the community and how they serve those needs. And they do their strategic planning goals based in the community's engagement around their strategic planning. And then the internal part is, what do you need to operationalize what you've heard the community needs through that strategic planning process? And how are you going to, operationalize that for your organization? And out of that, if a piece of it is we need to expand our program, or we need to expand our staff in order to expand our program, or we need to have, new facilities to do all of those things that's in our strategic plan, then that's the rationale for doing any and all of this.
Mhm. I love that. Yeah, that's huge. I'm so glad you like caught that what I said. Not that I said that on purpose, but I'm glad you caught that and sort of explained that nuance, because I think that's really important, because I would imagine that it can, I don't know, for a nonprofit leader thinking like, oh, let's do this big thing and raise a whole bunch of money. That's very exciting, but it needs to, there are things that we need to do to make sure that we're doing it for the right reason. So that's awesome. Great. So I wanted to just chat a little bit. You've mentioned a couple times, this, if you are embarking on a large campaign, all of these different people, and you very succinctly laid out all of the different roles that might be involved in a campaign. And I'd love to circle back to the finance person. Obviously, my company provides finance services, but I will say I don't think a lot of our clients have gone through any sort of major campaign like this. And so I would love if you could share a little bit about the sort of intersection of financial planning and campaign planning.
You bet. So the way I think about these capital campaigns and these growth initiatives from a financial perspective is there's two parts. There is the obvious part, which is how are we going to fund this stuff we want to do, right? So let's say,
Mm.
you want to build a new shelter for cats, and you want to have an expanded veterinary service program in that as part of that. And you want to, you need more staff in order to, to have the people power to run that expanded shelter and the new veterinary services. Let's just say that as an example. So the obvious thing that people look at is, and it's going to cost you $8 million, right? You figured that out. So the obvious thing is to figure out, or is to ask, how are we going to get this $8 million that we need, right? And so again, you can look at a bunch of different funding sources. You could look at public funding. Depending on what your mission is, you may have new market tax credits, you may have public allocations you can get. You may have, foundations, institutional foundations from philanthropy, individuals from philanthropy, maybe even corporate, although that's much less common in capital campaigns. And maybe you have, $1 million that you have in reserves that you could put towards it, and you feel like your organization could sustain, $1 million loan. So that means, you gotta, put all those puzzle pieces together to get your $8 million, right? That's the obvious thing that people think about. And that's
Mhm.
good that they're thinking about that, obviously. So that's one of the pieces. The other piece that I think gets a lot less airtime and a lot less attention, and frankly is maybe more important in some ways, at least equally important, is long-term financial planning. There's never been a business nonprofit, for-profit, right, that has grown and costs less to run. Your operational growth will be part of your annual operation growth, will be part of what you have to attend to. So while you're figuring out your $8 million project in this example, you also have to figure out, okay, our operating budget, let's fast forward and assume we get the $8 million and we're successful and we have this bigger, facility and these bigger programs and a bigger staff. How much is it going to cost to run our organization in 3 years from now? And that's called, future budget planning, performa, right? Which is like a fancy word, a jargony word for a pretend future budget, And so, I always like to say, it's sort of like, you don't want to go buy the house. Like, oh, I can figure out, we can put the down payment down and we can get it. But then, oops, we bought the house and now we realize we can't actually furnish it or pay the bills, every month. And what I would say is that people, when they're coming to me, and I think a lot of other capital campaign consultants, they're almost universally focused on the $8 million question. And I'm very passionate about them also putting equal attention on proving to themselves and doing the financial planning. And that's where I think, a team like yours can help them test out, even some of the questions in the 8 million. Well, how much debt could we handle, right? That's a question of financial management and your operational management. But even if you don't take on long-term debt, you still have to know we're going to be able to survive. There's so many, I think the worst case scenario would be, yay, we built a thing, and 3 years later, we go out of business because we actually can't sustain our new expansion of operations. And so that's where the deep partnership between financial planning on an operational side needs to be integral to the process for the organization. It also is a very important ingredient in securing large donations because, the people that are going to give you those major lead gifts, they're wanting to ensure that their investment is not going to something that's going to close in 3-4 years. And so first and foremost, it's for the organization to make sure it can sustain itself and doing the, future planning work to substantiate that for themselves. But it's also an important thing to do so that you can speak to that to your potential lead and major donors to encourage their investment in the project itself.
That is so important. And it sounds like when you're listening to it, if somebody listening is probably like, well, yeah, that sounds obvious, but I have seen this so many times where organizations, and not even related to a campaign, I feel like it's just this, but on an even bigger level, but I've seen organizations be like, well, we're having a really good year in terms of revenue. So let's hire a bunch of people because we have extra money in the budget. Well, yeah, that's great. Maybe we do this year, but like, what is the full year impact of this person's salary and benefits next year? Do we have, if we got a bunch of, one-time revenue this year, what are we going to do next year when we still have to pay this person's salary and benefits? Are we going to lay them off? Like, that's not really ideal. And so I've seen that happen a lot where we're not thinking about the future impact of investments and of expenses that we're incurring today. And so I think that is, that's just such a good point. You're right. With expansion comes expanded operating costs, and that, it's only going to continue to grow. So I love this idea of putting together a multi-year, budget forecast, pro forma, whatever you want to call it, but a multi-year financial plan before you embark on this huge project. So that is
we require it.
super smart.
Like we require it of our clients because our commitment is that, our sort of promise that we deliver on, right, is that we will help you raise the money you need for this project. And we're going to help you grow your fundraising in the future, forevermore. So yes, we're going to help you, raise the $8 million or whatever in that example, but we are also going to elevate your fundraising forevermore after your campaign. And that's in part because you're going to need it, because you're going to need more operating dollars. And
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
fundraising needs to grow in order to support that. And other things, like in this example, playing it out, if you have more veterinary services, you also have more revenue from those veterinary services. Like there's things, right? You have to all think about
Mm-hmm.
all of the elements, but everything needs to grow in relation to your expanded operational costs, including your fundraising.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's so important. And that's why I think it's really important for fundraisers to also understand financials and understand the importance of forecasting and budgeting appropriately. And I don't think it's okay for fundraisers to be like, well, I'm a fundraiser, finances, spreadsheets, not really my thing. Like it kind of has to be your thing, because if you're not the person to be creating the forecast and the budget, you need to be able to advise the organization that you work with on, on getting that in the right direction. So I love that as a
And
finance person.
I can't agree more. I would put another bullet on your list of why, it's important, is because even if you're just thinking it as a fundraiser, if what your primary job is to be a conduit to the donors and the foundations, they are going to want to know the answers to those questions, right? Like no one's going to give you $1 million if you can't
Yeah.
tell them that, and prove to them, not just tell them, prove to them, right, that um, their money is going to be safe and put to good use, and that you have longevity. So that's, I mean, frankly, that's why major nonprofit institutions, it's maybe not the whole reason, it's a part of the reason why major nonprofit institutions get those big donations versus some of the scrappier, smaller ones, because donors who have those kinds of resources know that, Notre Dame University is not going out of business, but the little arts organization, maybe, right? And so
Mhm.
that's a part of it, right? I mean, it's way more complex than that, but that is an important puzzle piece. And donors who are giving you significant gifts really do care about this. So as a fundraiser, you have to also, care, because that's something your donors care about. And you need to, have that confidence. And you have to, you have to be ethical. You have to tell donors the truth about whether or not there, is that financial stability in the organization, I think.
Mhm. Yeah.
I
This
would
just gave
also,
me an idea. Oh, go
I was
ahead.
going to say, I
Go
would
ahead.
also add your rant a little bit about like, oh, fundraisers, they need to know and care more. I would say it's shocking to me when I'm around other fundraising consultants and capital campaign consultants. They don't understand this as much as I think they should either. I think
Mm.
that's why we are a firm of choice for a lot of organizations. And I spent a lot of time, not being paid to like really talk about, hey, you don't have to fund this. And actually, rarely is a big capital project solely funded through philanthropy. I've had exactly one project like that in all the years. There is just not how it's done. It's a combination of funding sources, and um, you have to get your spreadsheet together or your financial management tools
Mhm.
together around your future budget planning. In
Mhm.
fact, we like yesterday, literally with one of our clients, we are like, we will not move into feasibility until you have done this to some degree that when you go out to feasibility and start talking to donors, we know they're going to ask you. So we're not going
Mhm.
to put you out there, and we're not going to go out there until you've done this work.
Mhm. Just another example of how finance and fundraising need to be friends, and
Exactly.
need to work hand in hand. I was gonna say, this is giving me an idea for like a course or a webinar or something. Finance for fundraisers. I'm like, I think this needs to happen.
Absolutely.
I love it. Well, before we wrap up, I just have one more question for you that I like to ask all of our listeners. What does a prosperous nonprofit look like to you?
Oh, I love that. I think that's a great question. I'm not so good on my feet, Stephanie. Let me think. I'm not quite sure how to say this, but I think that an organization that's making deep impact in the community along their mission and at the same time is putting the well-being of their staff at the center of doing so. I think that something along those lines would be, how I would define success. And so, to me, I love that, Richard Branson quote that's something like, clients, I like to switch out donors, but his quote is something like clients aren't, or customers aren't the most important thing. Your employees are the most important thing. And,
Mhm.
I like to switch out that word, sometimes we can think donors are our most important constituent group, but really it's your staff and your employees that are, and they're the ones that, make all the magic happen, including with your donors, but also with in your mission. And so I love the kind of growing awareness and commitment of our sector to talk about that and to invest in making sure that people are paid living wages and that their well-being is cared for.
Yes, I love that. I could not agree more. As yeah, somebody who's worked inside nonprofits and now being a business owner as well, I completely agree. Well, Amy, it has been such a pleasure to talk to you. I feel like I have all kinds of fresh ideas that I'm excited to think about and bring back to clients. Where can our listeners find out more about you?
Thanks for asking. People love the website. It's thevargagroup.com. And I'm sure you'll put a show link or something to that.
Yep.
It's real important for me that I create resources for all kinds of organizations, ones that can afford us or that are ready for us and ones that can't. And so there's tons and tons and tons of free resources there. You don't even have to give me your email address. You can just go on there and grab them. And so that's a great place to go. And I also seem to have a lot of fans on LinkedIn. And so you can look me up just at my name, Amy Varga, and I share some of those resources and all sorts of other things there. And I'd love to connect with anybody who wants to do so on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, I just popped over to your website right now and holy moly, like you can probably find a resource for like everything that we've talked about today on here. So this is fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. Yes, we will definitely link to thevargagroup.com in the show notes. And then it's very easy once you're there to navigate to resources. And there's a lot of good stuff on there. So Amy, thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your wisdom with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad you're in lots of organizations' corners around their money. It's so important.